So altcoins technically are in the longest bear market they've ever had, over 42 months. And the others' dominance has just hit levels we've not seen for a very, very long time, 2020 in fact. But the question I want to kind of address is this the bottom or just another trap and we're going to go lower? Today we're going to cover a couple of stuff. We're going to talk obviously Bitcoin, the likes of Ethereum, Solana, and what could flip things in July potentially. But like always, leave a like and stuff if you're still holding your altcoin bags hostage and you want to kind of get out of jail, so to speak. But yeah, let me know in a comment. Do you believe there is an alt season around the corner? Or, like everyone else, not convinced? Now it's Wednesday and you know what that means. We are currently breaking down the cryptocurrency market without the fluff, just dominance, trends, news, ETF bollocks. And ultimately, let's dive into the obvious in the room of altcoins and their overall weakness. But we talk about opportunities in the market if we're a trader or if we're an investor to buy opportunities, strength in trends, and you could argue that we are at the lows here on the screen and there may well be some sort of relief. We have had a very small relief, as I mentioned before, 2 or 3 months ago. It just wasn't very sustained. And it feels like we are due something. It's been a while, and we will unpack it and we will talk about it, but we do need to talk about some pretty damning statistics, unfortunately. Now, this is the monthly chart for others.d. And as I've said, we are in the longest period of a bear market in terms of length, right? We've had before in previous cycles volatility where it kind of ended a bit sharper, a lot less punishing. But ultimately, you could argue the amount of time of this, and we'll talk about it, is just pure sadness. And it's just like hopium has been crushed every single time. And you know, we talk about other content creators talking about like 2020 and stuff like that, which is fine. But we need to remember that this cycle is different. And I think if you agree with me or not, I don't mind. But ultimately, that's where I think it's a lot harder this cycle. It's not about the fact that random things have pumped and you've been caught out, or if Bitcoin has been stronger than ever before. It's more the duration of the altcoin market, and the drop off in terms of volatility and even retail interest has been pretty obvious when you talk about that length. And we will kind of talk about dominance as well. But let's address the elephant in the room. And we could talk about roughly this top here, going all the way down to this low here, is currently where we are in terms of the grand scheme of things. That is literally, you know, the dominance of the market on the monthly time frame, 1,277-ish days is a long time. That is a 42-month period, 42 bars on this monthly chart. And that is nearly, well, it's a fucking long time ago, let's be honest. There's no other way to talk about it. And that's where the problem lies. And we're currently sitting at levels here of proper interest where we should realistically be looking at this zone in and around this region between 6.5-ish or 6.2, you could argue, around this region, or the candle closures of potential reaction. And that's kind of what we want to see. And I'm not going to sugarcoat this in any way, shape or form, but we are in a downtrend, but we are due a relief. If we're talking about the obvious in the room here, we've got this high and we've got this new low, right? And obviously we've also got this kind of pullback as well around here. We are kind of pulling this kind of pattern where we may well be pulling back up into this region, and then who knows where we go from there. The thing is, right, we can't go down forever, right? And I know that sounds pretty obvious, but it's all about market psychology. It's all about time, and it's all about a number of things, really, but it's all about putting the odds in your favor. Now, I'm not saying here buy altcoins. I'm saying just be mindful that we may well get a shift in momentum, because, as I said before, we can't just keep going down forever. And this is only the others.d. This is excluding the top 10 assets in the market capitalization. So this is why we see certain things not affected by certain charts, because ultimately nothing's pumping, right? And this is where we are. If we're going to look a little bit deeper, you could argue the same thing here for the others, the other side of the market, sorry, the total 3, which is basically removing Bitcoin and Ethereum and also stable currencies, to see that we are at level lows. And these lows, as you can imagine, are pretty fucking daunting as well. And you can argue a couple of things here. You've got this region where we are currently right now, which you could probably argue pretty fucking important. And then you've got the same situation around the bottom down here, which is where the whole thing took off last time. We could actually still be looking to go a little bit lower, but are we looking at this as an area of interest where we might actually get a reaction? I'm hoping. But again, if we're looking at the market, you could argue this wick here maybe, if you want to look at that in a naughtier way. That is the wick from that point where basically, long story short, that's where Bitcoin had a bit of a wobble and some altcoins kind of crushed themselves. That is a lot longer. Ooh. So yeah, not looking fun. And let's talk about when alt season and all that kind of stuff. And we talk about monthly timeframes and the volatility and all that kind of stuff. And this is kind of where we are right now, right? The bottom line is this, and it's very, very simple. This is a very obvious, ugly looking uptrend, right? On the monthly time frame. We talk about, the longest, market cycle in terms of the bearish side of it for altcoins. And this is kind of where we are. And again, it all marries up between, you could argue potential bottoms around this point. You can argue bottom from here, where we've just been continuously going up. And that, again, is a 34-month period of Bitcoin dominance, just Bitcoin crushing everything. 34 months. That's a long, long, long time. So when we talk about when alt season, well, for me, and, like, follow, subscribe if you agree with me, I believe that we're not going to see a ferocious alt season again in terms of that situation where we've got cycle 2, cycle 1, right? Only because I think there's too many altcoins and I think that we are going to get caught out by liquidity going into the likes of Bitcoin, but more importantly, the big cap assets. So it may well give you results where the Bitcoin dominance does drop, obviously, but it may not give you those 20, 50, 100 X's on random coins you've never heard of, because I think the days of like putting AI in a name and changing the roadmap and changing the website in terms of massive booms are probably gone. And we've seen that with the ETF news, which I will come on to in a bit. But the sad reality to this is we need to kind of have a catalyst, and we haven't got that catalyst yet. But the catalyst could be around the corner because we're coming to key levels where people will probably take a note of it. And it may well present opportunity because a low liquidity asset may well get a short, sharp pump, and they may well do well in a short period. But as I say, I talk about alt season as in altcoins are going to outperform Bitcoin, but that doesn't mean we're going to get that. It just means we may well get a momentum drive where for a couple of periods of like, a weekly period, a monthly period, or maybe a bit longer, altcoins may just go on a little bit of a run. We've seen that before in the past. But again, the spreadsheet, the books, the bollocks that you see on X, they all talk about the past. But realistically, we need to talk about what is happening right now. This, realistically, doesn't really matter too much. All that matters is we are still rising. It is still a heavy dominant situation, and we may well still be looking at opportunity to present a potential bottom, but that bottom might not be in yet. And we've also got to address the elephant in the room of stable currency dominance. This is still here. You could argue this can go a lot lower. And if it does go a lot lower, it means more liquidity or assets that are sitting in stables have returned to the market. And right now, we've only had those two little yellow bars, which you could argue are very, very small little baby runs in the market so far in the last recent history. We are waiting for another one potentially. So that could be something to keep an eye on. And also others/BTC in the BTC pair, similar to the others.D, we are looking at potential key levels down here. So it could actually go a little bit lower. And again, you could argue even more like of a drastic situation. This is still in a honking downtrend, and it's been no reason for you to touch many investment assets with this. Let's be honest. Don't get me wrong. Nothing wrong with trading it though. But as I've said before in previous videos, this is an old article, but when we start to see that stable currency dominance drop, you get a lot of roaring elements around alt season. It does very well. You've probably seen my videos in the last month where we do talk about it quite a lot. But you've always got to remember that Bitcoin dominance will be the last thing to look at dropping. That is where I think people get caught out. They always wait for that to go first, but ultimately what you wait for first is stable currency dominance to drop first. Then you'll start seeing a change in the others or the total 3/BTC, and then you will eventually start to see the leading catalyst of the Bitcoin dominance finally dropping. By the way, if you're interested in trading or if you just don't want to get battered by investing, highly recommend Blowfin. If you're interested, you don't have to use leverage, but there's links below. There's a competition and you get 20% back in fees using my link. Now, Bitcoin is, in my opinion, a bit wild. It's a bit of a mess. There's a couple of base cases that I want to go through. I'm going to leave that open to and any sort of opinion, but I'm going to give you 3 base cases at the end of this video. certainly about Bitcoin. But the reality is it is very, very hard to read right now, in my opinion. We're looking at very, very bearish signals. We're looking at very, very bearish sentiment. And Bitcoin just doesn't give a shit. It just does what it wants to do. And the inflows and stuff like that is still good. We could talk about this as a potential downtrend, as in we've created these lower highs and lower lows and lower high. And it's just reacted today pretty crazy levels realistically around this point. So this L area, which we've talked about before, has been pretty strong. This $105,000 level is very, very strong. The thing that gives me more anxiety over anything is the fact that this chart looks like a dog's dinner. Ethereum's doing nothing, absolutely nothing. And I do apologize if you can hear rain right now because it's quite soothing in the background, but it's absolutely lashing down where I live. But other than that, things are not very exciting, certainly for the altcoin market. And that is probably one of the main reasons why Ethereum has just been saying, I'm not interested at all. Literally, casual. You could argue same sort of vibes for Solana. It's a little bit more spicy, the fact that there has been an ETF approval. Oh my God. If you watched my video not too long ago, I was talking about potential ETFs coming in November. There's been a lot of interest around the applications. There's been a lot more positive vibes around approving them. And I didn't expect it to happen, and it's trading tomorrow. So keep an eye on that. So that could be very, very interesting. But it is a little bit more spicy, the fact that it is starting to move a little bit, but nothing amazing. But when we talked about the obvious in the room here, there's an ETF has been approved and it's trading tomorrow. Tell me that in the chat, because you can't really see it. I mean, let's be honest, it moved a little bit, but not enough to kind of, as I say, get too excited. So it'd be interesting to see what happens here, because we have seen in the past, certainly with Bitcoin, it dumped. With Ethereum, it pumped and it dumped, and it didn't survive. So it'd be interesting to see where this actually does go in the next couple of weeks. If you want more content, by the way, it's very, very cheap. 4 extra videos a week, pretty much, journals, whatever trades I'm doing, and a Discord that is pretty heavy in alpha, to be fair. So let's talk about some base cases a little bit. Nothing crazy, though. Certainly about the 3 that I've kind of covered already. And the reason why I'm covering those 3 is because they're going to have the biggest weight on, I think, what the market's going to do. I'm not too bothered about XRP at the minute, because I think there's a lot of regulation elements that we need to kind of address there. But when we talk about stablecoins, that's always going to pump a little bit, if that makes sense. But the reality is here, that is due to demand. Let's talk about the obvious in the room. The base case for Bitcoin could well be it stays in this range of 105 and 114, well, 112k, let's be honest. You could also argue the exact same for Ethereum and Solana, because they might well just range because there's nothing happening over the course of the summer, and the dominance charts start to coil a little bit tighter and start doing very, very little, and will probably just chill for a bit. The other element could be a bullish breakout, a catalyst element, right? Where Bitcoin is not that far away from all-time high. It's only 4% away, right? That could allow maybe the Bitcoin dominance or USD dominance to collapse a little bit. And we could talk about that in a minute. So in terms of a catalyst breakout here, if Bitcoin moves first, it may well get a lot of interest back into the market. That could happen. And what that could lead into is the stable currency dominance, as I've said before, with this little white squiggly line, goes down to these lows around 5%, let's be honest. Anything below 5% will be very, very exciting, by the way. People will start getting very, very excited. And then you may also see others.d reversing back up and retesting some levels of key support levels, even if it is going to go to 8% around the EMA. That could be a situation, or even higher. That could allow altcoins to do something a little bit. But I think it may be just perspective of, oh, altcoins are pumping because Bitcoin's pumped, potentially. You've also got the bearish case. The bearish case could be that Bitcoin goes below 105k, 100k, whatever it may be, and retest some of these lows again, where we've kind of exhausted the fuel up here, and goes and readdresses back down to this kind of green line, which could be pretty fucking ugly. And also Ethereum goes below 2k, and Solana goes back down to 120k. Maybe lower, to be fair. So that could be pretty ugly. Then you start seeing the altcoin depression round 2 beginning, and more importantly, it could get pretty ugly for them dominance charts, which could lead to a dominance going much higher into the 68-69% levels. And you could argue the others / BTC and whatever, all these charts, and basically, let's be honest here, we could actually be looking at the total 3 / everything minus the stable currencies going all the way back down to these lows here, which could be ugly, which I think is going to be unlikely, but it could happen. But ultimately, this whole area is untapped in my viewpoint. So that could be very, very interesting to see where we go next. But as I say, there's 3 obvious base cases. For me, my opinion, I think it's going to be a boring summer. And we may be looking at the base case of a range. We've had that before in the past. I have talked about that a lot on my Patreon in terms of what happened last time, into a more favorable Q4. But as I say, if you want more videos like that, jump in the link below. And if you do want to genuinely learn from me in terms of courses, online tools, whatever, Discords and stuff, there is also Learning Crypto, which is different, but a 30-day free trial. So there we go. The market seems to be kind of doing its own thing, but ultimately coiling one way or another, and we need to be very, very, very careful. There is a little bit of ETF hype. There is a little bit of dominance teetering on the edge, but I am personally preparing for nothing but being mindful of volatility that could be around the corner. So let me know, how are you positioned for July? It could be very interesting for some people, I know. But yeah, if you found this video helpful, please do leave a like and subscribe if you want to see more content, which will be coming tomorrow. Don't forget though, watch this video here. This was what my take was on Monday, which seems to be pretty popular.